The pressure gauge on my wrist dropped 12 points in under 20 minutes. I stared at it twice because I thought it had to be broken. It wasn't. Every model I checked that morning showed a hard front rolling in by nightfall. Nothing like this. Nothing that drops a sky from gray to bruised black in under an hour. My name's Daniel Cole. I chase storms, though chase makes it sound more exciting than it usually is. Most of the job is sitting in a truck watching numbers change. This wasn't that. This was 3 years of grant money and a pressure model I'd built mostly alone, and if I didn't get clean data off this ridge, I didn't have much of a case left to make to anyone. The first pole on my tent went with a crack loud enough that I actually flinched, like it was a gunshot. I grabbed my data case, the one thing I trained myself to grab without thinking, and had it strapped to my chest before the canvas split down the middle. Rain came in sideways, hard enough that it was bouncing back up off the mud in front of me. I went down on one knee, mostly because the wind wanted me there anyway, and shoved 2 backup drives into a dry bag at my hip. My actual instruments, the loggers that mattered, were already anchored under a rock ledge about 20 yards off. They didn't need me. That was the only reason I let myself leave what was left of my tent and start moving. They'd keep recording whether I made it through the next hour or not. Then I heard something else. Canvas, straining somewhere across the clearing. A woman was out there fighting her own tent with both hands, and losing slowly. I didn't know her name yet. What I noticed first was that she'd pitched smarter than I had, lower, tucked closer to the tree line, and it still wasn't enough. One corner had lifted clean out of the mud. Every gust made the whole wall breathe inward like it was about to give. She had on a rain jacket soaked dark through the sleeves. One arm pinned over a stack of hard plastic cases like she was more worried about them than herself. Cap pulled low. Jaw set in that particular way people get when they're scared and refusing to let it show. I found out later her name was Adele Marsh, and what she was protecting wasn't luggage. It was 10 years of fieldwork on plants that only survive at altitude. If those samples died out here, so did the study. I didn't know any of that standing in the mud. All I knew was her shelter was about to go the way mine had. I crossed the clearing without really deciding to. "North corner," I shouted. "Your line's slipping." She looked up, water running straight off the brim of her cap into her eyes. "Mud won't hold a stake. It will if you angle it right." I didn't wait for her to agree to that either. Pulled the mallet off my belt loop, drove a peg in at maybe 40 degrees until it caught rock under the mud. Ran a second line downslope, tied it to a Douglas fir. She didn't ask me to explain any of it. She just watched what I was doing for about 2 seconds, got it, and started moving her cases behind the windbreak on her own. "Give me the loose line," I said. She handed it over. Our gloves touched for half a second, both soaked through, both freezing. Neither of us said anything about it. I tied it off, cinched it down, drove a third stake behind the tree roots. The tent shuddered once, twice, then it dropped low and held. "Inside," I said. She grabbed 2 cases. I grabbed the third, kept it level, and we ducked through the flap together. The second we were in, the roar outside dropped to a hard, steady drumming. Still loud. Nothing like what it had been 30 seconds earlier. I looked around while I caught my breath. Lanterns swinging off the center pole. Notebooks stacked in a plastic bin. A little stove kit shoved in the corner. 2 sleeping mats laid out. Her shelter had survived. Mine hadn't. "Storm took your tent," she said. Not really a question. It did. Neither of us said much else right away. Rain kept hammering down on the canvas above us, and somewhere below the ridge, I already knew the fire road was starting to flood. Neither of us had any idea yet how long this storm was actually going to keep us up here, or how much it was about to cost both of us to find out. I sat back against my pack, breathing hard, hands still shaking a little from the cold. Adele had gone quiet, checking each of her cases by lantern light, running a finger along the latches like she was counting them. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place yet, and honestly, I didn't know what to say to a stranger whose entire life's work I just watched almost blow off a mountain. "You're bleeding," she said suddenly, nodding at my hand. I looked down. A shallow cut across 2 knuckles, probably from the mallet or a peg edge. I couldn't remember which. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing, it's just not bad." she said, already reaching for a small first aid kit from one of the side pouches. There's a difference. I let her wrap it, mostly because arguing about a scratch felt stupid given everything else going on. She worked fast, like she'd done it plenty of times in the field before, wrapping gauze tight enough to hold but not so tight it cut off blood flow. You didn't have to come over, she said, not looking up from my hand. Didn't have much of a choice. Watching your tent go down wasn't really an option. Most people would have stayed with their own gear. Most people's gear wasn't already gone, I said. That got something close to a laugh out of her, short and surprised, like she hadn't expected to laugh at all tonight. She finished tying off the gauze and sat back, and for a second neither of us said anything, just listened to the wind testing every seam of the tent like it was looking for a weak spot. Outside, the fire road kept flooding. Inside, two people who'd known each other for maybe 10 minutes were sitting a few feet apart in the only dry shelter left on the ridge, trying to figure out what came next. The drumming on the tent had settled into something almost steady by the time either of us spoke again, and for a minute I let myself believe the worst of it might actually be over. It wasn't, but I didn't know that yet. Adele went through her cases a second time, checking every latch like she didn't trust the first pass. I understood, watching her do it, that this wasn't nerves. It was math. One shelter left standing, two sets of work that mattered, and a road outside that was turning into a river with every hour that passed. Ranger station's 4 hours out in good weather, she said, more to herself than to me, glancing toward the tent flap. Longer now, I said. Ground's already saturated. That road's not holding. She looked at her cases again, then back at me, and something in her face shifted from worry into a decision. I could actually see it happen, which surprised me. Most people don't let you watch them decide something. Stay in mine, she said. I looked at the space between her gear, the stove, the 2 sleeping mats. It wasn't an offer wrapped in anything soft. It was survival math, plain as that, and I wanted both of us clear on it before I said yes to anything. Only if you promise not to regret it, I said. I check my instruments every few hours. My stuff stays on my side. If either of us gets uncomfortable, I'm out in the vestibule. Don't touch my moss samples and we won't have a problem, she said. Deal. She pointed to the left side of the tent. You're there. I'm changing behind the divider. I turned back to my own bag and kept my eyes on the zipper while she stepped behind a tarp hung across the middle of the tent. I heard fabric move, a zipper, boots setting down soft on the mat. When she came back out, she had on a dry fleece over a base layer, sat down by her cases, and opened a notebook with fingers that were still a little numb from the cold. I could tell by the way she fumbled the pencil. You're Daniel Cole, she said, not quite a question. Someone on the radio mentioned you were tracking this same system. People talk too much on that thing. Probably. It's also how half this camp still knows what's going on, she said. I pulled my tablet out and checked the offline map. Main road's done, I said. Soil saturation crossed 90% before noon. 1 more hour of this and that whole slope's coming down. Her pencil stopped moving. She pressed it into the page hard enough that I noticed. My department head ordered me down that road this morning, she said. Same guy who canceled my helicopter pickup. That's not bad luck. That's a setup. Maybe, she said. If I don't make his checkpoint by tomorrow, he calls it a violation. He's been trying to pull my funding for months. Thinks the whole live sample method is too risky, too expensive. Is he wrong? She looked at her cases, and there wasn't any hesitation in her voice at all. It's risky because it's the only thing that actually works. If these sit unattended more than 2 days, everything I've built the last several years turns into compost. So there it was, laid out plain. 2 very different problems, tangled up in the same storm. My model needed data I could only get by staying near my instruments. Her research needed her at those samples in time, and neither one of us could afford to walk into a mudslide just to satisfy somebody sitting safe behind a desk somewhere. What's his name? I asked. The department head. Halden, she said, like the word tasted bad on its own. Dr. Halden. He's not cruel exactly. He's just careful about his own name being anywhere near a failure. Mine's expendable to him. His isn't. I didn't say anything to that because there wasn't much to say. I'd met versions of that guy before, mostly in press conferences after some disaster nobody wanted to take responsibility for. Outside, the wind picked back up, hard enough that the tent wall shivered. Neither of us noticed right away the thin line of water starting to creep along the seam near the corner. It looked small, barely worth mentioning over the noise of everything else happening around us. "You have kids?" she asked out of nowhere, glancing up from her notebook. "No," I said. "Never really had the life for it." "You?" "No. Married to the work, I guess, if that counts." She said it flat, not bitter, just a fact she'd made peace with a while back. "Same, pretty much." She almost smiled at that, then went back to her notes and I went back to my tablet and we kept talking through logistics, where the loggers were, how long her samples could last, what day the storm models showed a possible break. While that quiet leak kept spreading, slow, soaking into the edge of a folded blanket, neither of us had bothered to move yet. It was maybe another 20 minutes before either of us realized how much water had actually pooled along that seam. By then it was already too late to save what it had reached. "Adele," I said, pointing. "Your blanket." She turned, and her face did something quick and controlled, like she was deciding whether to be annoyed or just deal with it. She reached for it and pulled it back, soaked clean through, heavier than it should have been, cold water running off it onto the mat. "Great," she muttered. "Not dramatic about it. Just tired." I grabbed a spare glove liner from my pack and jammed it into the gap where the water was coming in, pressing until the drip slowed to almost nothing. "That'll help," I said. "Doesn't fix what's already wet, though." "No," she said, holding the blanket up toward the little heater, wringing at it uselessly. "It doesn't." The temperature in the tent had been dropping steadily for the last hour, and now, with her one backup layer soaked through, I could see exactly where this was headed before either of us said it out loud. The blanket wasn't drying. Adele held it near the heater another minute, twisting at the fabric, and I watched her shoulders drop slightly when it became obvious it wasn't going to work fast enough to matter. She didn't say anything about it. She folded it over a gearbox instead, like putting it somewhere out of sight would make the problem smaller. Didn't. The cold outside kept working its way into the tent through every gap I hadn't managed to seal. I could see my own breath now when I exhaled, which told me the temperature had dropped further than either of us wanted to admit. When I looked over at Adele, she had her arms wrapped tight around herself, and her shivering had gone from the occasional shudder to something steady and constant. She still didn't say anything. I recognized the look on her face from earlier on the ridge, that same stubborn refusal to admit a problem until she absolutely had to. "You're shaking," I said. "I'm fine." Her voice came out tighter than she probably meant it to. "You're not. Not with a soaked blanket and this kind of cold." She didn't answer right away, just sat there, teeth pressed together hard enough that I could see the muscle in her jaw working. Rain kept tapping against the tent walls, and somewhere down the slope I could hear water moving fast over rock, louder than it had been an hour ago. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped low, almost like she didn't want to hear herself say it. "Can I sleep under your blanket?" she said. Just until I warm up." I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, of course." I shifted my gear to one side, made room on my mat, left a clear gap between where I'd be and where she'd be. "This is strictly practical," I said. "Same rules as everything else tonight." "I know," she said quietly. "Thanks." She pulled the edge of my dry blanket over her shoulders, arms still crossed tight over her chest at first, keeping careful distance between us. For a few minutes her shivering didn't change much at all. Then, slow, it started to ease. Her breathing settled into something steadier, and at some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, she'd fallen asleep sitting almost upright, worn out from 2 straight days of fighting a storm that hadn't given either of us a real break. I stayed up a while longer, checking my instruments by headlamp, watching the wind test every seam of the tent like it was hunting for a weak point. My pressure readings kept climbing and dropping in patterns I hadn't seen before, nothing that matched what I'd recorded on any prior storm. Whatever the system was doing, it wasn't behaving the way it should have, and some part of me, The part that had spent 3 years building a model around exactly this kind of weather knew we hadn't seen the worst of it yet. Outside, the fire road kept flooding, cutting off the one path that might have made this easier for either of us. Inside, 2 people who'd met less than a day earlier were sharing one dry blanket in the cold, held together by nothing more complicated than the fact that surviving the next few days was going to take both of us, whether either of us had planned on that or not. At some point I must have dozed off too, because I woke to gray light coming through the tent fabric and the rain had shifted into something quieter. Not gone, just different. Adele was already awake, sitting up, blanket folded neatly back onto my side like she'd wanted to erase any trace of the night before. "Morning," she said, a little rough. "Morning." I sat up, rubbing at my neck where I'd slept wrong against my pack. "You sleep okay?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. And there was something almost embarrassed in the way she said it, like she hadn't meant to admit that much. I didn't push it. I checked my instruments instead. Pressure was still doing that strange climb and drop pattern from the night before, worse now if anything. I frowned at the readout longer than I meant to. "What?" she said, noticing. "Not sure yet. Numbers aren't settling the way a normal front usually does." "Is that bad?" "Don't know yet. Might just mean the worst of it already passed through." She didn't look convinced, and honestly, neither was I. We ate something out of a ration packet, I don't remember what, some kind of dried fruit and nuts mix that tasted like cardboard, and packed up what gear we could carry. Outside, the clearing looked rearranged. Branches down everywhere. The ground had new channels of runoff cutting across it that hadn't been there the day before. Neither of us said much while we worked. There wasn't much to say yet. The storm had knocked down one tent, flooded a road, and put us both in a position neither of us had asked for, and now the only thing left to figure out was what happened next, and how far the 2 of us could get before the mountain decided to test us again. The ground gave out just after dawn. It started low, almost nothing, a crack somewhere below the tree line that I mistook at first for thunder. Then it grew into something else entirely. A grinding roar that shook under our boots hard enough that Adele grabbed my arm without thinking. We stepped out of the tent just in time to watch the whole slope below camp let go. A wide brown wave of mud and torn brush sweeping straight across where the fire road used to be. Less than 30 seconds and the road was gone, buried under tons of wet earth. Adele stood frozen next to me, radio clutched in one gloved hand. Before either of us could get a word out, static cracked through the speaker, and a voice neither of us wanted to hear came through. "Marsh, this is Halden." Cold even through the bad signal. "You missed the checkpoint. I'm logging your team as non-compliant." Her grip on the radio tightened until the plastic creaked. "The fire road just washed out," she said. "There's nothing left to follow down there." "You were ordered to descend yesterday," Halden said. "That'll be reviewed once you're back. Until then, I'm freezing your funding and recommending a full suspension." The line hissed. Rain kept tapping steady against my hood while I watched her shoulders drop just slightly before she caught herself and straightened back up. I held my hand out. "Give it here." She passed it over without arguing. "This is Daniel Cole, independent weather researcher," I said. "I'm recording this as part of an incident log. The fire road failed this morning after saturation crossed 90%. I documented that risk before your checkpoint deadline was even set. Dr. Marsh refused an unsafe route and protected active research material under proper field protocol. You penalize her for not walking her team into a mudslide. My full data goes to the University Review Board." Silence for a long moment. When Halden's voice came back, it was clipped, colder than before. "Make sure the samples arrive intact," he said, and the channel cut. Adele stared at the radio, then out at where the road used to be. "He wanted that road to fail after I already committed to it," she said quietly. "Wanted a clean report with your name on the mistake instead of his." "He almost got it," I said, handing the radio back. "No," she said. "He got recorded instead. It wasn't a win exactly. Just something solid enough to stand on, which after 2 days like this felt like plenty." We packed what gear survived and started up a ridge trail that the map made look a lot easier than it actually was. Loose shale slid under every other step. Wet needles hid cracks in the ground that hadn't been visible the day before. I strapped the heaviest specimen case to my own pack without asking, since Adele's shoulder had clearly stiffened up after 2 days of hauling cases without rest. She noticed and gave me a look sharp enough to cut something. "I can carry my own weight. Never said you couldn't. I'm just moving some of it so you don't blow your shoulder out completely." "I dislike how reasonable that sounds," she muttered. "Get that a lot." About halfway up, she suddenly grabbed my sleeve hard, stopping me mid-step. I looked down and saw a thin black line cutting through the wet pine needles right where my next step would have landed. "Good eye," I said once I'd caught my breath. "Plants teach you to watch the ground," she said. "You're always looking at the sky instead. Guess that makes us a decent team." She almost smiled at that. Small, quick, gone before I could really register it, and marked the crack on her waterproof map in red pencil so neither of us forgot it was there. We stopped for a short break around midday, backs against a slab of rock, chewing through another ration bar that tasted like nothing in particular. "You always this careful?" she asked. "Or is it just because of me?" "Bit of both," I admitted. "Careful's kept me alive longer than luck has." "Same," she said, "though I'll admit the luck ran out a while back." "Yeah," I said. "Mine too, apparently." She laughed at that, short, surprised again, the same way she had the first night. It struck me that I liked hearing it. Not in some big dramatic way, just something small and easy that made the cold a little less obvious for a second. We kept moving after that, the trail narrowing further, cutting through patches of old snow caught in shadowed hollows. Trust between us wasn't building through long talks. It was building in exactly this small moments, each of us catching something the other missed, one careful step after another, up a ridge that kept threatening to give way beneath our boots. By late afternoon, the sky had gone a strange flat gray again, and I didn't like the way the wind had started pulling from a different direction than it had all day. "Something wrong?" Adele asked, watching my face. "Maybe," I said. "Let's just keep moving." Sleet started ticking against the trees just as the light began to fade, turning every exposed rock we crossed into something closer to glass. We found a stone overhang big enough to duck under and rigged a tarp across the open side to cut the worst of the wind. Adele checked her sample temperatures by headlamp while I recalibrated my instruments, and neither set of numbers looked good. 40 hours, maybe, before your cold packs fail," I said. "Longer if we insulate them better and keep them off the rock." "With what?" she asked, glancing at our limited gear. I nodded at my own sleeping pad. "No," she said immediately. "You need that as much as I do out here. Samples need stable temperature more than I need comfort tonight." She looked at the pad, then back at me, clearly running some kind of calculation in her head the way she'd done the first night in the tent. "Your data matters too. My instruments keep recording whether I'm comfortable or not," I said. "Your samples don't get that luxury." She didn't argue further, took the pad, cut it into fitted pieces with her field knife, built a tight layer of insulation around each case with a kind of precision that told me exactly how many years she'd spent perfecting this. Only after every latch clicked shut did she look up again. "Thank you," she said. "You improved the setup. You supplied the material. Call it even." That night, without the pad under me, the cold from the stone worked straight into my back. I woke every 20 minutes or so as the wind kept snapping the tarp against rock. By the third time I stirred, Adele noticed. On the fourth, she reached into her pack and pulled out a folded strip of dry insulation she'd been saving as backup for the samples. "Not critical anymore," she said, tossing it toward me. "Take it so you can still walk tomorrow." "I can manage." "Take it, Daniel." Her voice had an edge of exhaustion in it. Not annoyance exactly, just done arguing. "I've already adjusted the stack. There's margin now." The logic was solid, annoyingly so, and I gave in. "You always this stubborn about giving things away?" I asked, tucking the strip under my shoulder. "Only when it's actually necessary," she said. "Otherwise I'm plenty selfish." "Could have fooled me. You haven't seen me around good coffee yet." I laughed at that, quiet, mostly into the dark, and it was the first time all day I'd actually felt something other than cold or worried. Morning brought hard sun and black ice across the ridge, sunlight reflecting sharp off wet granite in a way that made every step look far safer than it actually was. I tested each foothold before letting her follow. At one point she slipped on a slick patch and grabbed my forearm to catch herself. I planted my boots, held steady until she found her balance, then let go the second she didn't need the support anymore. "You make holding back look exhausting," she said, breathless. "Takes practice. That's not in any field manual, you know. Restraint as a skill." "Should be," I said. Near midday my barometer started dropping fast, faster than I liked. I stopped under a crooked pine and looked west, spotting a flat gray shelf cloud building along the far ridge, a strange greenish tint underneath that usually meant hail and a violent downdraft not far behind it. Adele saw my face change. "How bad?" "Not dangerous if we move now. Very dangerous if we're caught out here exposed." "How much time?" "Maybe 2 hours. Could be less." She looked once toward the tree line, then down at the cases she still carried. "Can we make it?" "Yes." "Then stop explaining and start walking," she said. We moved fast after that, crossing granite slabs and disappearing trail markers, racing a front that was closing in behind us just as fast as the last one had. Around the second hour, the wind shifted hard enough to nearly knock her sideways, and I grabbed her pack strap without thinking, steadying her until she got her footing back under the next gust. "Thanks," she said, not looking at me, focused on the trail ahead. "Don't mention it." "I mean it, Daniel." "I know," I said. "Still don't need to mention it." We reached tree cover just as the first hard gusts of the new front hit the exposed rock behind us, and for a second we both just stood there, breathing hard, watching the storm chew up the ridge we'd just crossed. A small wooden cabin came into view through a gap in the trees just as the sun dropped behind the ridge. Heavy log walls, a metal roof, one small window catching the last orange light of the day. I found the lockbox under the porch rail, punched in the access code tied to my old weather permit, and pushed the door open into a space that was cold and dusty, but completely dry. Dry mattered more than anything else right then. I got the wood stove lit while Adele set her cases on the table, careful, checking each one twice out of habit now. My hands were shaking from exhaustion by the time the fire caught, but it caught, and smoke pulled clean up through the pipe. "They made it this far," she said, looking at the cases. "We made it this far," I said. She looked over at me, something steadier in her face than there'd been the first night we met. "You kept every boundary you named. Back at the tent, on the ridge, all of it." "Said I would," I told her. Didn't figure the terrain got a vote on that. That got a small laugh out of her, tired but real. She sat down across from the stove, pulling her knees up, and for a minute neither of us said anything, just listened to the fire working through dry wood after days of nothing but wet. The cabin radio crackled to life on the third try, and a familiar voice, our contact, Ray from base camp, came through clear at last, relief obvious even through the static. "Cole, Marsh, that you?" "It's us," I said. "Cabin's secure. Samples viable. We'll need pickup once conditions allow." "Copy that," Ray said. "I've already got the timestamps and dispatch records pulled together. Should be more than enough to keep Halden from rewriting what actually happened out there." Adele closed her eyes at that, just for a second. Relief plain and simple. "He's going to try anyway," she said once the radio went quiet again. "Let him try," I said. "Records don't lie, even if he does." We spent that night in the cabin trading small talk that had nothing to do with storms or samples or funding. Favorite bad meals we'd eaten in the field, the worst radio call either of us had ever taken, the time she'd nearly lost a sample case to a curious mountain goat 2 seasons back. It wasn't much. It didn't need to be much. After 3 days of nothing but survival math, it felt like enough just to talk about something ordinary. Rescue came the next morning under a hard blue sky, the whole mountain looking scrubbed clean after everything it had put us through. At base camp, Adele walked straight past Halden without slowing down and refused to let him anywhere near her research. I laid out the saturation data proving the road had failed well before his deadline had even come due, and the review board sided with her almost immediately. Funding restored. Halden's authority over the project suspended pending a full investigation. I didn't see her again for a few weeks after that. Paperwork, follow-up interviews, the usual mess that comes after something like this gets written up officially. When we did talk, it was mostly over the phone, short calls that ran long without either of us really noticing. Months later, once her research had been published and the mountain had gone back to being just a quiet green slope with no trace of the storm left on it, I asked if she'd come back up there with me. She didn't ask why, just said yes like it was obvious. We hiked the same ridge trail on a clear, quiet afternoon. No storm anywhere near the horizon this time. Near the spot where the tent had first gone down, I stopped, and she noticed I'd stopped and turned around. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking about the blanket." She laughed, caught off guard. "That's what you're thinking about?" "Among other things," I said. "Mostly that." I told her that somewhere between the mud, the cold nights, and one quiet question she'd asked me in the dark that first night, I'd stopped thinking of her as someone I needed to protect and started thinking of her as someone I wanted standing next to me, permanently, not just for a storm. Then I got down on one knee, ring in hand, and asked her to marry me. She said yes before I'd even finished the sentence, laughing through tears, the wind carrying the sound of it clean across the same ridge where all of this had started.